So now we move to a very interesting session on literature, art, and culture of an uprising, which will be chaired by Dr. Siba Barkataki in conversation with Commodore Oracle Johnson. Uh, to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Donald. We shall start this discussion by first defining and laying out the framework of functioning of a literary testimony of history. So, when we talk of the literary representation of history of the uprising, we do not simply juxtapose literature and history. We will observe how, in this interdisciplinary approach, literature and history, in fact, intersect. And only when we view this domain as an intersection, and here I quote sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, does the cross correlation of many other texts in the frames of an intertextual approach appear. So, in the case of the naval uprising, there is potential to explore the historical, social, and the psychological realities of a people. We will also try to look at the unfolding events from a very critical point of view. We will try to always also theorize them from a post colonial perspective. This framework, in fact, will allow us to enter into a multi-layered discursive space, which is also a highlight of our academic seminar today. And talking of multiple narratives, sir, you have dedicated a chapter entitled Unwrapping an Uprising in your book, Timeless Week, which starts with the conversation between your father, who served in the Royal Indian Navy, and your son. Would you like to elaborate a little on the contents of this chapter?
Thank you, Dr. Sieber. And that actually sets me up to put the context very clear. And may I say this first with a very deep sense of gratitude. It's been a number of decades in which my association with the Maritime History Society has itself undergone a series of transformations. As a young officer, we were always encouraged through, of course, what Admiral Avti would encourage the chairperson and vice chairman. We attended seminars. Then it's nearly a decade and a half ago, I was asked to 2 years in succession to do a paper. And that set up this, what we are going to talk today on. There were two themes that Admiral Jayant Nadkarni had wanted a serving naval officer to work on. One was this entire larger role of Royal Indian Navy in World War II. Kalesh Mohanan, who was part of the earlier session, has actually done a complete work on that. And it had been done in two series, the official series and also the by the Royal Indian Navy Officers Association. I had a very personal connect and I wanted to do the uprising because I remember when I was much younger and my father would talk about life at sea, what happened when he went to the Suez and how they were once headed towards Burma in the whole component. So as a young student, I heard a particular perspective. Then, of course, when I was asked to do the study, the entire journey, which a number of people have talked about, the archives, whether it's the British Archives or the National Archives, and that whole journey of putting the book together, of course, why I got the book to do, because it had to be done first. Good friend Commodore Kesnur, whom you will hear tomorrow, was to originally do the uprising, but then now Pramod Kapoor of Rowley is doing the work. So, as part of the plan, I picked up this chapter, Unwrapping an Uprising, and I was very greatly assisted in this process by a number of significant archives at the National Maritime Museum, Greenwich, which were used to contextualize what my father had told me. So I was very blessed to have research content and also a first-hand account of a participant. And today, years later, when I'm looking here at MHS, and I'm saying there is so much more content. Some of them were not even known to me in 2010. So it's a story of writing, what Dr. Uttara mentioned in the morning, about so many narratives, so many contexts, so many versions, and it is a challenge or a nightmare for anyone to write about it, and you have to really probably use the entire content to narrow it down. So my father's account, it helped me narrow down the perspective in Unwrapping and Uprising. It's a very small chapter, but useful reading as a quick summary. But I think if we were to talk of narratives, the most famous, I have a number of books here on reference. Almost everyone will talk of Mutiny of the Innocents, and you've done a bit of reading. So why don't you talk about this famous author, B.C. Dutt?
In fact, let me begin by situating this book into our framework of intersecting narratives, which you have very beautifully also laid out when you talked about your father and the different time gaps and the different moments of history where you discovered the uprising from different positions. Talking about this book, Mutiny of Innocence, in the foreword of the book, S. Natarajan, who was the editor of the Free Press Journal in 1946, he situates this book into the borderland between personal narrative and history. In fact, it's very interesting that Dutt himself claims that he is no historian, but is in fact one of the actors of the uprising, and therefore this really brings out the narrative of the subaltern rating, if you look at it from a post-colonial perspective, because we have the official accounts, but here we have the detailed accounts of the living conditions of the ratings, because he was a rating himself. He described the mood of the ratings before, during, and after the uprising, and it's very interesting that he supported his arguments with the help of government records and newspaper reports that were released at that point of time. And there was also a very vivid and grueling vivid description of the grueling interrogation that he was subjected to once he was discovered, and he gave a description of his physical and mental state, and how with very difficulty he was able to maintain a coherent narrative so as not to betray his fellow ratings. And I have to say that this book represents the point where historical narration and literary testimony intersect. In fact, Mutiny of Innocence oscillates between the individual psychogram and the imprinting of various social and political behaviors.
So let's stay on this book, Mutiny of the Innocents. As I mentioned, and I'm going to refer to Subrata Banerjee, to one more boss, and I'll come to that at the time, and even a British narrative. So tell me, you yourself are a student of literature, and as a student of literature, unlike a historian, unlike a political scientist, unlike a maritime professional, what's your take from B.C. Dutt's account? What's the takeaway you have?
So I have to tell you that when I started reading this book, right in the beginning, it was very clear that B.C. Dutt was in fact very happy with his service. Not very happy, but he was fairly satisfied with his service in the Navy, in spite of the bad food and the foul language of the instructors. So there I could see the psychological profile of a very young, aspirational Indian of that era. So the most obvious question that came to mind was, what actually turned these servicemen into rebels. And so I went on with this, and of course, with the view of the subaltern narrative. In fact, these subaltern narratives of B.C. Dutt and Biswanath Bose, as you just mentioned, they expose the imperial design of instilling racial inequality, and they highlighted that this discrimination was crude and it was made to make Indians feel inferior to the British. In fact, that clearly articulates his sentiment of feeling like the other in one's home. And when he says, I began to question my whole existence, what did I fight for? Whose war did I fight? These questions appeared more and more crucial as the days passed. To the British authorities, we were servicemen. We were not supposed to think, but do our jobs with unquestioning devotion and loyalty. To nationalist India, we were mere mercenaries. So this was a very beautiful point where I thought that I could see there was a painful realization of being perpetually subjected to the process which Hegel calls the othering. And so there was this painful realization of their marginal status, not only within the armed forces, but also vis-a-vis the larger Indian society, because while in the services, they were in the bottom rank and they were discriminated against. When it came to the larger Indian society, of which of course they were a part, they realized that they were somehow isolated from the political mainstream, which was then really, potent with the nationalistic fever. And so if I use the words of Robert J.C. Young, they were part of a culture and yet excluded by its dominant voices, both inside yet outside. And finally, we could see that the naval rating was in fact a deep-seated desire to unite or to reunite with the collective consciousness. And this, existential awakening, in fact, helped them to recognize the injustices that they were actually going through, both social and professional. And so when we talk of these narratives, I'm sure that you have, and we were speaking earlier, in fact, that there's also a counter narrative to this subaltern narrative. Would you like to shed some light on that aspect?
So I knew that there was this Lieutenant Percy Goggi from the RINBR, and in fact, very fortunate. It's last few years, some of these things. So I'll be very happy as a part of projecting what we have done. So this is kind of the Indian Naval Revolt of 1946, Percy. And I would like to pull out something very interesting. In writing the foreword, we have Lord Sorensen. He was formerly R.W. Sorensen, a member of Parliament. And see, this is what he says. In the early weeks of 1946, I was privileged to be a member of the Parliamentary Goodwill Mission to India. After a strenuous and exciting tour, we reached England again on February 12, and a week later began the serious episode that Gorgie so graphically narrates in the following pages. And Percy Goggi gives a very objective narration. In fact, it's very well written, which is very clear. And Sorensen goes on to say this line: no doubt, normally the relationship between British naval officers and Indian ratings had not been unfriendly. But apart from a continuously latent resentment against a preponderating British officer class, there were instances of racial oral humiliation, an example of which has been referred to the study. And he commends Gorgie for his historical and human value in the narrative, and the entire illustration of a mass political struggle and the overflowing of human discontent. And I am recalled of a conversation I had with my father around the time I was writing my chapter. And I asked, because I remember when I was young, he would tell me all these good things that happened at sea. He would tell about the lieutenant on board. He was a landing craft tank. And he would say, come here, Johnny. And that was a general name for, people call me Johnny, but that was general name for a young soldier. And he would say, I will teach you this. He was an electrical artificer, so there was a bond. But he says something strange happened as soon as the war got over. And maybe as a result of the delays or demobilization, suddenly that camaraderie seems to have evaporated. Even the Indian officers were probably somewhere they didn't know what was, and they were themselves unpacking this. So there is a shift of this entire component, and so the setting comes a very a different era, and I said the evolution of the direction. There's one more factor I must quote, and I think Kalesh mentioned it. There's a very rigid definition of mutiny when it comes to a military environment. And maybe those who are not in military may not comprehend this. Moment two people present the same grievance at the same time, it is defined as a mutiny. And Percy talks of this very interesting. He says, he on the day, on 18th, the day later, instead of the usual smart, disciplined turnout, this was the bewildering scene that greeted my eyes as I alighted from the car at 8:45 and walked to my office in Castle Barracks, the shore establishment. And he says, stopping a leading seaman who was on my staff, I asked him, why was he not at his post? And he said, imagine a young guy. My father was 19 at that stage. Okay. There's another leading says, strike, sir. So Percy says, strike? That's impossible. There's nothing called a strike in the armed forces. It's mutiny. And of course, correctly speaking in context, we have reworded an uprising. So that's the counter narrative. That's the journey which is very different. So, which actually brings up this entire perspective is much later is when the writings happen. And I'll talk about timings. But if I come back to B.C. Dutt, who writes, in fact, a couple of decades later, what does that reveal to you as a narrative displaced by a few decades in time?
Yes, it's very interesting, and we are again going to talk about it. You spoke about your father, who as a rating experienced it. Then he spoke about it to his son, and then to his grandson. And I'm sure there was an evolution in the way he felt about it, and which is only human. B.C. Dutt, in Mutiny of Innocence, he wrote his book 25 years after the uprising in independent India as a colonial subject. So the time, the distance that was required to probably reflect upon it, and also I'm sure the age factor also worked. Also, post-colonial studies dominated the intellectual discourse around that time. And so, sentiments such as othering, subaltern, identity, marginality, the self had become significant and heavy with meaning. And in his book, although he doesn't necessarily use these words, we can clearly see traces of these sentiments in his book. And from a researcher's point of view, it's very interesting to observe how with time the post-colonial aspect enters, and he's also very scientific to a certain extent, where he's countering it every time with official records. But that goes on to take a truly post-colonial stance in saying that we need a historical narrative that does not mimic official records. In fact, he cites a very interesting example of the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857, where all the mutineers were butchered. And according to that, not one of them left a memoir behind, not a scrap. Their story died with them. So the story of the Sepoy Mutiny is now available in 3 versions: the British ruler's account, the account of the freedom fighters who wanted the people to believe in it, and what the histories of free India produced under the patronage of official patronage during the centenary. So you see, without the text of, he says, the diaries of the participants, the story is never complete. It is never whole. And in fact, I would like to come back to you from this perspective. How do you think the timing and perspective of the narrators define our understanding of the uprising or any historical event for that matter?
You are right about timing, and I think whether it's the audience perspective as a reader or even the narrator, and let me anchor it very accurately. I have again among our rich archives, and I am not ashamed to just share about. So this is the RIN strike by Subrata Banerjee, not a naval person. He was an Indian Army soldier around the time. Now, why did I pick this up? I want to read the publisher's note in this just to tell the richness of the content that exists. There is a many components in this, but in short, let me just give me a moment. The timing. This is what the publisher says. The manuscript of this book was submitted as early as 1947. Just 10 months after it. Just a little more than a year after the RIN strike. For a number of reasons, the book could not be published. This book was first published in 1954. Except for a few minor editorial corrections, no attempt was made to revise the manuscript. So we have an account which was written as a bystander, but as a sympathizer. That means there is a person who can identify, and this person had seen the perspective of the INA, which many people talk, I sometimes feel, without adequate study. I mean, it's not just blind inspiration. These people were genuine soldiers, genuine sailors, and Subrata Banerjee's account covers this perspective as a fellow military person. So he understands the challenges he wants. And then my really masterpiece is what I call Bishwanath Bose. Bishwanath Bose, I'm going to go straight to, there's a chapter in the end called The Author. Incidentally, Bishwanath Bose was an RIN rating, and he was born the same year as my father. So when I was reading it, and his father, Rabi Ranjan Bose, took part in the Royal Indian Marines. So he took part in World War I. So there's a family, and he talks about he along with his friend, one was a headmaster, one was a principal of another school. They come and join. They're not ordinary peasants or something. They're very intelligent, hardworking people who come and join. And when he was given a chance to gain sea time, because without adequate sea experience, they won't get promoted senior, he did hear a lot of things that were happening around in the world. So Bishwanath Bose talks about what was happening. And my father says one of the challenges was they've been to Sicily, they've been to Suez, they've been to Burma, they've been victors, and the narrative actually talks that they had been recognized the world over as liberators, the one who brought victory, the one who brought context of being seen as fighting in the cause of democracy. Morning, briefly, there was, and suddenly they come and see that they are part of the oppressed. Now, this is what a narration of that time means, both written at that time and written some years later, where the context becomes so clear and we see these different slices.
Yes.
In 2021, there are scenarios, and I'm going to stick to a mandate. There are scenarios which are similar. There are scenarios which are very displaced in time. So narratives across time, they evolve. Audiences across time, they evolve. And that is why archives need to be revisited. And I completely agree with what Dr. Uttara said. Just the literature review project itself will be so enriching. So that's my take on these different narratives.
So now that we're talking about the literature review, let me tell you about what are the things that we could probably do in the MHS as far as research is concerned. And again, I would like to refer to what Professor Sahasrabuddhe spoke in the morning, and that I found really interesting and very relevant to us, because she spoke about doing small research projects involving young researchers, international relations students, history students, and if I may be so partial, even literature students, students. So these, attainable projects that can be done by them. Other thing is, which is very interesting, is the survey of literature
Yes.
in the British archives. And also, finally, I feel that such contesting narratives, and if we encourage that more, become very interesting epistemological tools in studying history, because the incongruity between the official version of the event and, in the case of the ratings, in fact, the subaltern narrative within the ranks of the victors.
Yes.
So, so this incongruity makes for a lot of fertile ground for research, and I think we should encourage that. In fact, the MHS library, currently curated by Mr. Indrajit Lawrence Punjabi, is a treasure trove of books and archives, and it is a delight for any researcher to work in. Would you so then like to elaborate
I
a
think
little
you
more
have some
on
archives,
Yes.
and I'm very happy to show them off, because they are the work my predecessor, Commander Mohan Narayan, and his team. I'm just going to share a couple of them. So these are the kind of narratives we have. Some I'll select some which are very timely. Many of them are just newspaper clippings, but they have been well preserved. For example, there is this thing, RN grievance to be addressed, and we still have these clippings preserved for us. I must tell you this, it's not scripted, but there was a gentleman called KC Rajpurohit. He retired as a manager in Punjab National Bank, and he came and visited with his family, and we were very thrilled. His father was a participant in the uprising. In fact, he remained in the Navy for some years, and he shared some of his archives, which we have scanned, and we have those available. What helps in this entire part is, you said it right. Sometimes we look at it from a very linear direction. It's an historical event. Today we always said it has to be contextualized in the international relations environment. I liked what Vishal's paper did. Even what Mangesh brought, a little bit of the security angle, and he's got from a legal framework he's looking at it. So let me come back. Why not pieces of literature? Just simple pull-out literature, and there are good creative minds, and I know we're going to discuss on art later, but just literature. Take a story, create a setting around it. Surprisingly, no one has found it reliable enough for Bollywood to come up on a theme, and which we do not a documentary. You can actually create a fictional narrative around that setting. I know somebody who tried to do it, but probably landed up again talking history. So I think there are multiple frameworks to look at it. So that's what I would put. And I am saying, as director and head of research, I'm inviting those who are in the audience, those who are participating, please come and be a part of not just the RIN uprising, but a number of sub-themes. India is awakening to its maritime reality. India is awakening to its multi-dimensional perspectives and oceans. Come and do a week-long project. Come and do a 3-month project. Come and do a monograph. Come and do a thesis. It's the capacity is infinite. I do remember someone trying to work on some other setting. So just establishing the possibilities are immense. Your creativity, I would say, is the only limitation. To any of the ones who are hearing, come and be a part. I will be very happy to guide. We all are available to look at it from multiple perspectives.
So, and to sum up, I would like you to talk about the literary and cultural representation of the naval uprising of 1946 from the perspective of MHS, the art and
Yes. So again, Dr. Uttara Sesrubudhe mentioned in a thematic address this in 2017. Ashish Radhadaksha and Vivan Sundaram, along with the whole team, set up this the Forgotten Insurrection 1946. It was in CSMVS with a lot of clippings and a lot of, we are aware, and I'm going to share read something about it. Some images have remained imprinted whenever someone talks of the uprising. You know, I love the city of Mumbai for its maritime nature. And this is a place where there's uprising. In fact, today is 17th. Everyone says naval uprising began on 18th. And as I tweeted this morning, on 17th February, the ratings decided to go on a hunger strike. Of course, we'll not look from a military perspective, but they decided, and they did it very silently. They decided it was too much. Commander Kalesh Mohanan mentioned the immediate causes in response to a question on Talwar, but they decided to go on a hunger strike. They were really pushed to the wall with the quality of food and difficulties, and all that happened. But 2-3 days later, the image of the uprising in newspapers is bare-bodied. I mean, bare-bodied with like a classic rating would, along with mill workers and students, and we'll be hearing more of that tomorrow. There are people on the streets, and in one unity and one accord. Again, I'm sorry, I hope I don't take away lines from tomorrow, some of the research presentations, but this image of a very inclusive, very one vibe with the larger community in the context of the post-war, when, and India was one of the first ones to gain independence. This setting that's enabled it is a classic art piece. The protest, and beyond the, again, I say not from the military point of view, but just a protest, it vibing. There are stories of when the protesters raised flag. They showed their apolitical nature by not raising one flag, but every political party they could put. So they got the Muslim League, the Congress flag, the Communist flag. They put everyone to say we are not political. We are not here. We are soldiers, but we right now find it very hard. Again, a classic art representation. So Vivaan caught it. But what I would really want to dedicate, there is this poem, Ye Kiska Lahu Hai Kaun Mara, which became a song in the movie called Dharmaputra in 1961. Tragically, you talk of timing. By the time 1961, it becomes a song bemoaning the partition. But the first two verses, and I'm going to read to kind of capture the essence of this whole session, is the first two verses. This whole song was penned by Sahir Ludhianvi, inspired by the Arayan uprising. So I'm going to use this opportunity. I love poetry. And this is as an aside. In both the in the starting videos, we have been playing the song that became a part of us last year. Please go and watch that song. But let me come back to Sahir Ludhianvi. And ये है इसके शब्द. इसका शीर्षक है ये किसका लहू है कौन मरा. धरती की सुलगती छाती के बेचैन शरारे पूछते हैं. धरती की सुलगती छाती के बेचैन शरारे पूछते हैं. तुम लोग जिन्हें अपना न सके वो खून के धारे पूछते हैं. धरती की सुलगती छाती के बेचैन शरारे पूछते हैं. तुम लोग जिन्हें अपना न सके वो खून के धारे पूछते हैं. सड़कों की जुबान चिल्लाती है. सड़कों की जुबान चिल्लाती है. सागर के किनारे पूछते हैं. एंड पे अटेंशन टू दिस कीवर्ड. ये किसका लहू है कौन मरा. ये किसका लहू है कौन मरा. ए रहबर ए मुल्क ओ कौम बता. ये किसका लहू है कौन मरा. I remember when my father finished sharing with me in the later part of the story, and he was very poignant. And I asked him if things were different. He said this, I wish it never happened. And I wish it never happened. But maybe if conditions are the same, it would be. And he remembers this saying that they were marched in 4 abreast to their commanding officer, to the executive officer, and they're given this certificate. And he always says this, and I hope to capture that, is charged with disgrace from His Majesty's service. And I have to use my language, Malayalam, and and he says, Nada Ninda certificate. And he actually, he says they together tore the certificate, threw it back, and he walks. Then I looked at him and he says, that was the folly of youth. You know, we were 19, we didn't know what we were doing, but we were hurt, we were upset. And he is the one, the same narration when I finished my first training at sea and I said it's hard. And the same person who took part in an uprising now says that which is forged in the fire will not wither away in the sun. So, you know, there is a lot of art, emotion, literature that has to be captured. And that's why it's not just a plain research work, but a literary capturing is very, very important.
Thank you, sir. In fact, let us conclude this session with just a few remarks. I feel that there might have been regrets, but I think finally, that is my feeling, that when you were talking about bare-bodied people on the road and people who were kind of getting together and they were supporting, somehow I think they could find that union with that collective nationalistic fervor for independence, because they said that they were against foreign rule. They wanted to serve in the Navy of independent India. So with this, sir, and thank you for a very encouraging perspective at the end. And with this, I would like to conclude this special session. Thank you all for attending day one of the seminar. Do join us tomorrow for a very interesting panel discussion at 10 o'clock on archives and narration of Naval Uprising 1946, which will be anchored by Commodore Shrikant Kesnur, Director, Maritime Warfare Center. It will also feature eminent panelists, namely Dr. Anirudh Deshpande from the Department of History, University of Delhi, and Shri Pramod Kapoor, founder and publisher of Roli Books, New Delhi. You can use the same link to attend day 2 of the seminar. Thank you and a very good day to you all.